Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of All Business Media Presents. I'm your host, Chrissy J, and tonight I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming one of my favorite guests back to the show. To introduce himself and tonight's topics, Mr. Kimberly Berg.
Feminism is not a modern-day invention. The roots of feminism are very deep and extend into Paleolithic and Neolithic times, 30,000 years ago. We have been led to believe that patriarchy has existed since the beginning of time. The truth is, a patriarchal social system has existed for the last 5,000 years, beginning around the 3rd century BC. Before then, a goddess culture that honored women had thrived for over 20,000 years. We are not talking about Druid-type Neanderthals. Instead, we are talking about Cro-Magnon people who migrated into Iraq, Turkey, and southern Europe from Eastern Africa around 40,000 years ago. Unlike Neanderthals, Cro-Magnon looked very much like we do today, with erect posture and advanced dexterity and intelligence. Women were highly honored and respected in Paleolithic, Neolithic times because they possessed the key to the regeneration of the tribe or clan. Conception was not understood in ancient times. It was not associated with sex. So when a woman was able to conceive and give birth to human life, it was thought that she was influenced by what we would call supernatural or cosmic powers. Many thought it was the light of the moon that caused a woman to become pregnant. This seemed to make perfect sense, since a woman's belly becomes full and round, just like the moon. And after birth, her belly returns to its original size, same as the moon. A second convincing observation was the corresponding cycle of a woman's menstrual period to the monthly cycle of the moon. Eventually, these ideas coalesced around a figure we call the Great Mother Goddess. It was thought that if a woman can create a living baby, then the deity who created the earth and everything on the earth must also be a woman. For this reason, the Great Mother Goddess was worshipped for thousands of years as creator. The goddess was held in high esteem, as evident by the numerous artistic creations of female figurines and statues found across Europe and into Siberia. The small figurines may have been worn like the cross is worn in today's Christian communities. As long as a female deity was worshipped, women were highly honored in Paleolithic, Neolithic society. Experiencing complete freedom, women were empowered to be creators of a social order that enjoyed thousands of years of a peaceful, nonviolent history. In the words of Riane Eisler, author of The Chalice and the Blade, patriarchy is a 5,000-year detour from how we once lived, perhaps the proverbial golden age.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you back to the show, Kim. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Good, good. I'm glad to hear it. So tonight we're going to be delving into the legacy of the goddess, as you put it.
Yes.
You were discovering women's lost heritage, which is
actually
an
the
issue.
lost legacy.
Oh, the lost legacy. I'm sorry.
Well, the lost, no, it's the legacy of the goddess, but it's the lost, lost heritage.
Yes, women's lost heritage.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know what, no better place, I should say, to start than the beginning with the late Paleolithic era.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's important to look at the timeline that I have mapped out here. The Paleolithic is divided here into 3 different areas. According to the years in which they were recognized. And the earliest is the Aurignacian period from about 30,000 to about 27,000 years BC. And I know it's hard to imagine anything, such time spans, because for us, 100 years is considered.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, oh, that was so long ago. That was back in the 90s.
Yeah.
That wasn't that long, in the grand scheme of things.
But so to imagine something 30,000 years ago and people living in those times, most people's conception is that we must be talking about Neanderthals, half intelligent and all muscle and no brains.
Exactly, the giant forehead rooting for grubs.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what I have to emphasize here is that these people were very much like we were and had the same concerns as we do. And they also turned out to be a very spiritual people. For them to live and to die, had a lot of meaning, it meant a lot of things. And we have to realize that they were living much closer to nature than we are. And so they saw everything as going through a phase of birth in spring, and then flourishing, and then dying again. But they saw death in a different way than we do, because they also saw spring and everything coming back to life again. So even in these early times, and even before, one of the things we know about Neanderthals, that even they were concerned about death and the idea of loss, but also if there was another life,
Yes, because everything they saw was a continuous cycle of birth, flourishment, death, and then renewal again in the spring.
Right.
So for them, death was just another stage. There was always something more after it.
Right. And like this Neanderthal, they discovered a Neanderthal grave where a small child was buried, and they were able to recognize that there were flowers put on the grave. So that's our first indication that death really was a very traumatic experience, even at that time. And that was Neanderthal. But then when Cro-Magnon men came by, and women, that they were even more sensitive to these questions of life and birth and death. And they took a lot of the things that they did were actually generated by this concern. So so at that time, this was when the glaciers were starting to recede, but there was still a lot of tundra and open spaces and a lot of animals, that were easy to fill their plates. They had no problem finding food, but that also, like I say, there was an abundant food supply, so that was not really the problem at that time. But it's also important to understand, since they didn't have the threat of starvation or a lot of the ills of humanity, people lived in harmony with nature and with themselves. There isn't the conflict, the militarism, the violence that we've been experiencing since patriarchy. These people were living a charmed life, you might even say.
It certainly sounds it.
Yes.
It certainly sounds that way.
And, this is interesting. This is in Wales, actually an island off of the mainland. And originally, it was a place where people gathered and had different rituals, and it was a spiritual center. And then, and it also was a hedge. There were a circle of stones, actually 2 circles. So it had religion, even from the very beginning, it was a religious spot that was highly honored.
It sounds like a precursor to the Druidic stones of power.
Yes. And then later, they built what's called a passage burial. And so you see the opening on this side, but actually it runs right through the burial and opens up at the other end as well.
Really?
And some of the stones are still, you can see here, the inner circle still were still present. And then there was an outer circle, which I think one of those stones is still there. But this was very well designed because during the summer solstice, it's the only time of the year a ray of light can shine right through the passage. So it was not just something thrown together.
No, this was well planned. I mean, I know I can't plan something that well, so this was extraordinarily well planned.
And the ground, the mound itself is not natural. That was built up that way. So right now, that's one of the main tourist attractions in Wales.
Yeah, I know. That's definitely now made my list. But only during the summer solstice. Yes. I want to see that ray of light go through.
Yes, yes. And this is a cave drawing. And we have here the drawing of horses. And horses, it wasn't just large wild beasts that they were drawing. Horses also were very important to them. But this was a very early example of cave drawing.
Now, this appears to be a multitude of hands.
Yes, it is. And this was a very popular feature in caves. And it's sort of, the way I see it, is saying, I'm here, this is me, a form of identity.
Exactly.
And
it's the equivalent of spray painting your name on a wall now, I was here.
Yeah,
This is me.
the same thing, the same way. And this was, there's some, I've seen some pictures like that where it's just plastered over the whole wall,
Really?
Just handprints. And it's all done by blowing a pigment of, through over your hand and creating a silhouette of the hand. So, I mean, people were very much like we are now. They wanted to express their identity.
And they wanted to leave their mark on the world.
Yeah,
I mean, this is a perfect, almost literal example of that.
Right.
Putting your hands to saying, I was here, this is something I did.
Yes. And they're just as powerful as any of the paintings they did of animals, So this is the second phase. This is the gravitian, I guess it's called, gravitian, or grevitian, that's how it's pronounced. And this is from 27 to 19,000 BC. And this is a period, it's not confined just to this period, but what we call, or what has been called Venus figures. And they are small statuettes. The Venus of Willendorf is one of the most popular, and the Venus of Lascaux is also very popular. we'll see images of those.
I think we have some up on the screen now of the Venus figurettes.
Yeah, these are small figurines. They're not the one that we just saw. But they're only about 3 inches tall.
Really?
They're worn like a necklace or an armlet, and they're all shapes and sizes. These are actually in the Brooklyn Museum right now. You
Really?
can see them, yeah. And they also tell us a lot about how seriously the people at that time took not just the female, but the female goddess. And it's like a lot like the way we wear the cross. They were wearing images like this.
Yeah, and that's you wear that because that's a powerful part of your spirituality and your identity.
Right.
So this shows reverence. This shows exactly how powerful that force was in their lives.
Right.
That they're wearing these, on a daily basis.
Yes, that's one thing that is hard for us to understand even now. But these images, they considered very, very important. But the reason that they were called Venuses is because most of the anthropologists at that time were male, and when they saw this and said, "This is beauty. This is a beautiful woman."
Teach their own. Teach their own.
So they call them Venus as sort of a sardonic way of belittling what they were doing.
Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. Yeah. These are Venus figures.
But actually, it's a very way of demeaning something that was once held in such high regard.
Yeah, I mean, if the people who use these every day and who respected them and who honored them were to know that they were being referred to in that way, it was almost blasphemous to them.
Yeah.
That they're being so disrespected.
Right. And this gives you an illustration of just how widespread this was. The whole territory from Spain to Siberia and everything in between, these are all areas where these figurines have been found. And
so it was definitely a widespread system.
Yes.
It wasn't just localized.
Yeah, and that's the thing about things that happened that far back in time. You think of little colonies here, there, and everywhere, and that they didn't have any kind of communication between them. But actually, there was a lot of things happening, and there was a lot of one settlement influencing another settlement nearby, and they influencing another settlement.
Yeah, until eventually it spreads from Spain to Siberia.
And that can be attributed to women. They have this way of communicating with each other, sharing things together, and spreading different ideas. And I'm sure that the fact that it covers such a large area is because it was women who really were doing the communicating.
Yeah, they were the one who were disseminating the information, across multiple countries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're that way now too. I mean, this is a personality.
What do you think? Would you like to talk?
Really changed. No, I mean, like the march in D.C. and
That's true.
even now, the march that we just went through is all social media, and it's women talking to women.
It's very true.
Yes.
It's very true. So now it looks like these are more Venus figures. Venus of Willendorf?
The Venus of Willendorf is very popular. And as you can see, when the male anthropologists saw these figures, they said, "Oh, this is all sex, They're just interested in sex and nothing else."
Of course.
The truth is that at that time, conception was not understood at all. So they didn't equate sex with children and childbirth. And nobody this was for thousands and thousands of years. The whole idea of conception was unknown. And like I said in the introduction, they thought it must be the moon, the light of the moon, because they saw themselves in relationship to the moon for the way their belly grew and then collapsed like the moon. And also the menstrual cycles, that was very important. To see something that intimate that corresponds to something that's happening on a cosmic level has a really profound effect on you. And it was not lost on women, and it was not lost on men either. They saw the relationship also. And they very highly respected women because they saw that association. And they knew at that time, they figured that they weren't involved in the whole process of conception at all. So for them, they were looking at everything from the outside, while women were feeling it and experiencing it. And that makes a big difference. And that went on for tens of thousands of years. It's hard to imagine, but
I remember reading something some years ago about how even once the correlation between sex and conception was made, they still went by the moon phases to gauge fertility, to gauge things of that nature, and even to gauge when there was something off about their cycles. That's how in tune the female body was with the waning and waxing of the moon.
Right. And this is the Venus of La Sol. And this is also very popular. This was carved on the entrance of a cave. And she's holding bison horn. Is that how you pronounce it?
I always, yes.
I always have it as saying bison horn. And I've been told that's not the way.
No, I believe it's bison.
Yeah,
I think so. At least that's how I say it.
No, you're right. And there's 13 marks on the horn. And people have speculated, what the 13 marks are. It could either be the phases. There's 13. The calendar that they had at that time was went by the moon, and there's 13 phases, 13 cycles of the moon in a year. So that may be what it was trying to do, but. It's a mystery exactly what it meant. But she's holding it up as if it was very important.
Oh, well, whatever it was, that might be lost to time, but it was certainly important to them.
Oh, yes, definitely. This is, I think, really a terrific sense of artistic excellence. The way it's drawn, the motion, the action, the beautiful expression of grace and action. It is really beautiful example of Paleolithic art.
Now, is this also found in a cave?
No, yeah, I think it was on a cave wall also. And the figure on the left, or I guess it's the left, is a shaman.
Okay. Oh, it's very interesting.
And this also is a very excellent use of artistic. Here, everything's in motion and everything's so graceful. It's really beautifully drawn. And to think that that the artist could have such talent at 20,000 years ago.
That's very true. Evolution's failed me. I can't do that now. They could do that 20,000 years ago.
But the thing is that someone is able to do it. I mean, it's natural. It's in our genes.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
be able to create. And we don't know how many other pictures they drew like that, but it's. Or how many he had to draw in order to draw this well.
Yeah, that's true, but it's kind of hard to crumple up and throw away a cave wall. So this is one of those things I feel like they had to get right in the first try.
Yeah, all you could do is cover it up and try again.
Yeah.
And here's another example. I think this was done later. But here again, now here you have women involved in it. and animals. And I think on the lower left, you have a woman or a hunter. But the idea here is that women played a part in the hunting pageant. And they were an important part of it because they had problems, of killing anything, especially an animal. Mm-hmm. In fact, a lot of times they thought animals were more highly developed than they were as far as being in association with nature and mm-hmm. living in nature. So for them, they had a really hard time accepting the idea that it was okay to kill an animal for food. Mm-hmm. And you have to actually talk to the animal and talk to the spirit and let them know that what you're doing, you're not just there killing the animal without a purpose. And here's a beautiful, really beautiful sculpture of a horse. This also appeared in a cave. And all this stuff has been done. A lot of this stuff is 20,000 years ago.
It's amazingly well preserved. And they eroded.
And all this time they were developing the tools to carve into different mediums, either
and that's rock. What's also impressive about this, that this was done 20,000 years ago with the tools they had available at the time.
Well, see, now that's another big point because male anthropologists, when they were doing this work here, all they could see is the tools that they were making, that the men were making. And at least that's how they saw it.
Yeah. A woman can't make that.
And not only, but they follow the phases from one phase to another, how they advance, how they refine their tools. And that's all they ever talked about and wrote about and made scholarly papers about. And women were never, ever mentioned.
Well, because, this is the advancement of tools and weaponry and militarization. It's nothing to do with art or finer things or women or femininity.
Actually, at this point, there wasn't any militarization.
No, but I'm saying from the male perspective.
Yeah.
Look at this. You could use this to do this. You can use this you can use that to make a cave painting, but you could also use this to hunt. You can use this to hurt.
Yeah, but it did also make it possible to create pieces of art as well. Mm-hmm. And so this is the third, the Magdalenian period from 16,000 to 10,000. And this is the time the cave art really came into its own. Mm-hmm. And one of the most famous caves is La Sole Cave. And like I say, this was the height of the Paleolithic art scene. It was absolutely fantastic, the things they were doing. And this is one example of it. Now here, these are not, they're not carved into the rock. They actually used earth to build it up.
Really?
Yeah. And
wow.
But it's very realistic. It's a male and female boar, not a boar, but I'm not even sure what kind of animal it is, but it's very well done.
And it almost looks like stone.
Yeah, it does, but it was built up like that. So they had many different techniques, it wasn't just carving into rock.
No, but the fact that something is built up of earth like that can last that long.
Yeah, right.
It's amazing.
It is in a cave, too.
That's true. That's true, but still.
This is one of the finest examples of cave mural drawing of an animal. And this is right towards the end. At this point, hunting was no longer in vogue anymore. The glaciers had receded. Most of the animals were migrating further north. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of like a way of preserving what had been in the past. And we're the ones that benefited because we never would have known if they hadn't recorded what the animals that they were living with. And so now this is the end of the Paleolithic era and the beginning of the Neolithic era. And there was a hiatus between the two. There was called the Mesolithic. And this was a time where the climate was changing. And there's very little we know about that time. There must have been a lot of chaos and changes taking place during that period. And this is called Kato Hilyuk. I don't know exactly how they pronounced it, but
I wouldn't try. That's all I feel confident saying. I wouldn't try.
Yeah. But anyway, this was the first major settlement that took place in the Neolithic era. After like 2,000, at least 2,000 years of nothing happening. And you would think in those 2,000 years that they would not have remembered anything that had happened previously in the Paleolithic era. But it turns out that this was really just an extension of what happened in Paleolithic times.
So it's almost like they hit pause and then just came right back to it after 2,000 years of nothing. They jumped right back into it.
And during this time now, the goddess religion really took root. And whereas in Paleolithic times, it was still very important if they were wearing these necklaces around their neck. You can tell that it was still important to these people. But it becomes even more important now. And they actually, now it becomes ritualized and it's largely something that women were the spearhead of. They were the ones that created a whole, how can I say, there were even temples built at this time. This is called Sybil, one of the goddesses, was one of the most popular goddesses at that time. And it's on my left, but it's on the right of the image, is image of Sybil found in a grain bin, sitting on a throne, giving birth. And I think it was 3,000 years later, you have Sybil also sitting on a throne, flanked by 2 lions. And throughout that whole time, there's very little change that's taken place. You still have a woman sitting on a throne, flanked by 2 animals. And in Roman times, we have, again, the goddess sitting on a throne, flanked by 2 women. And that's the women culture was very conservative. There's very few changes that took place over time. And actually, that's one thing that led to the demise of their culture. There wasn't enough change.
We were happy to let things stay the way they were. So. Okay.
This is very important, I think. These are examples of figurines with their arms raised. And this is a spiritual exercise, like they were bringing down the energy from above into their bodies. And here again, the woman holding up her arms, bringing down the energy in a hunting scene, making the hunting scene hopefully successful. And women were recognized as playing a very important part in the success of the hunting. And this is another cave drawing. This was done in the Katahuyu times. It's not as well done as in Paleolithic times, but they were still making, drawing images on cave walls. And here you can see it's a little bit different. She's wearing a skirt. I think is leopard skirt. And you see this a lot at this time in the paintings and artwork. So it was a happy, joyful time, you know, and they knew how to have fun and celebrate.
That's good. That's good that this was a joyous time for them. This was a time of joyfulness and revelry and celebration.
Right, and it was also a very peaceful, harmonious time. And this is another cave drawing, which again is not quite as well done as in Paleolithic, but they were still practicing the same art. And this is a boar, I believe, and this also is done in later in Neolithic time. And it too lacks the... so now in Neolithic times, now they're starting to work with ceramics and creating vases or vases, and also with interesting designs on it. And the designs are mostly symbolic. They're not just there, they're there for a purpose. And so I included a few of these. We have some others also.
Now, were these sacred to their religion at the time, or their spirituality?
Yes, to some degree. I mean, they served a very utilitarian purpose as well, but it's also very artistic and well-formed and creative. And you can see the designs here on these, and all different shapes and sizes. And this is actually a mirror from a gravesite in Katal, Huyu. And it was made from a volcanic rock from a volcano that was quite close to the city itself. But it was shiny and black and actually served as a mirror at that time, and very popular with the women at that time.
So far we've said that women talkative and vain. I don't think I like where this is going.
Well, they actually, this city was built on a trade route, and they made a lot of money selling.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
Mineral. Not just mirrors, but it was used for other things as well. But no military or militaristic purposes.
No, the militaries have much use for polished stones.
And this is actually the remains of a temple in Katal. And it's interesting because they were honoring not just women, but men also. The horns represent male power and male spirituality. And you can see a breast on the side wall. And in the original, there were breasts that lined all the way around the walls. So it was recognition that women and men's spirituality was important and being honored in the temple. So, and this is, I'm sorry that I hope this can be blown up, when it's actually used.
I'm sure they're working on it now. So our viewers at home will be able to see a much larger version of this than we currently have.
Yeah. But this is a floor plan of one part of it that's been excavated. And the interesting thing, their architecture was very interesting. These are all houses built one against the other. There was no streets. And the only way you could get in or travel around from one room to another or one house to the other was on the roof. And you had a ladder from the roof descending inside your house. And that's how you got in and out. And it could be that it was built that way for defensive purposes, but there was no wall around the city. So It was very compact. Your neighbors were right next to you, and it was must have been quite a social scene.
Must have been. Like I said, this just looks like a giant house, honestly. It looks like if you were to take it,
like a hotel with all the...
Yeah, it's like, all right, well, this is my sister's room, this is my brother's room, this is my neighbor's room, and you had all these different families living together. That's amazing.
Well, actually, they didn't have that many rooms.
Well, no, you know what I'm just saying.
Every square is another house, like another house.
No, that's what I'm saying. But like, if you would like to liken it to today with all the rooms in one house.
Yeah. Well, here you had beds all around the walls. But you can't see it here, but there's a little space in each one of these rooms, or just about, that's squared off and separated from the rest of the room, and those were all shrine rooms, and just about every house had a shrine. So from that you can imagine again how important the goddess was to these people.
You're worshiping and honoring the goddess in your home,
right,
all the time. Everybody has a shrine. Everybody's paying, their respects to the deity. Everyone's showing honor. Everybody's showing respect and love. That's amazing.
Right.
Absolutely amazing.
It's interesting because in these times, there was no distinction made between the secular and the sacred. It was all sacred. So can you understand living your life like that? That's how they lived. It's a foreign idea
probably to most people today who feel the need to be their own person and express themselves, but to be so entwined in your spirituality must have been a very powerful feeling.
Yes, and it wasn't just one or two people like that. Everybody.
Yeah, that's just the way society was.
Yeah. So we think of any society that old, thousands of years ago, that it's hard, only half civilized, and they were more advanced than we were in many ways.
Yeah, it certainly appears that way.
And the idea that it was a peaceful, when have you ever heard of peace? Even 100 years of peace, And here we're talking about thousands of years.
Thousands of years.
It's just amazing when you think of it.
It is. Now, is this a side view of essentially the floor plan that we were just viewing?
Yes, this is same city. Archaeologists have been doing a lot of work here, and this gives you sort of a sense of the scope of the city and its layout. But at one time it was thought to be at least 6,000 people living in this area.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And this is another example of the dig. This is the same city again, and it's all covered. It's all covered over with a roof, and people doing the digging and sorting things out. It's a very well managed excavation. And the original person who started it, this all is taking place in Turkey, of course, Anatolia, Turkey, and they were seeing so many female figurines and other things that reflected what women were doing, that the Turkish government shut it down, the whole excavation.
Really?
Yeah. And it's only in more recent times that his son has continued the excavation, and Turkey has allowed them to go ahead with it. But it created quite a lot of problems because up to this point, it was just assumed that it was men who were the driving force of any society or civilization. And this thing shows that women had a very active role in the society. And it didn't go over too well.
No, not if they shut down the whole process. Like, nope, sorry, don't want to know anymore.
Right.
All right. Now, this actually goes back to the first time we had you as a guest, where we showed your triptych, Awaken My Beloved.
Right. And I'm doing it because I want to impress upon you that their spirituality was not just for the Neolithic, Paleolithic, 20,000 year ago people. It's for us too. And I want to bring out the idea that feminism that existed in Paleolithic times and ancient times is just as important today as it was for them. Mm-hmm. And I want to try to bring the two together so you can see what we're experiencing, trying to awake to the goddess, mm-hmm. trying to awake to our identity, our femininity, the way it was being experienced by women in ancient times without where they were able to have complete control over their life, complete power to do whatever they needed to do. And that's what we're missing now. And that's why it's so important for us, for women especially, to identify with their ancestors. And that's what I'm trying to bring out in the poem, or in this series of poetry and illustrations.
Mm-hmm. So on your screen, you see the first, for those of you who missed it the first time, and for everyone tuning in tonight, you see the first of the three.
Right. The first three are called Awaken the Beloved. And so here now you can see how I'm using the goddess image of the Paleolithic era and applying it to a conventional modern scene. Mm-hmm. And the woman is being used symbolically as asleep, unaware of the goddess above her, mm-hmm. unaware of the goddess in her life, the way it was being felt in Paleolithic times. Mm-hmm. And the goddess above still very actively involved, trying to awaken the woman from her sleep. And here again, now she's aroused. She seems to be aware of something happening, but she's not aware of the goddess above her, only that something's happening. And so she's on her side and becoming slowly aroused.
Okay, until finally...
And now
she turns
we see the goddess in her full glory, her radiation, her power over and illuminating her. And it's interesting. I just became re-aware of it. Even if you've ever read Starhawk, she talks about the cone, the power of the cone. And here we see the cone, and exactly how it was visualized as a very powerful spiritual experience that we can feel and can empower us in a way that nothing else can. Mm. And so here again, we're bringing the Neolithic spirituality to the present moment, and how important it is to bring us awake from our sleep.
Yes, to arise and be a strong feminine person once again, to regain your autonomy, to regain your femininity, to regain your strength.
Right, your freedom. Mm. And here's the result of that. This is a woman trying to raise herself, trying to rise above her burdens. And so she may not be aware of who is standing behind her. There is the ancient goddess right behind her, helping her, empowering her to rise. And here now we have an image of a woman who has risen, and she's glorifying the feeling of strength, of power, of freedom that she's experiencing. Mm-hmm. And the mandala in the background is another very strong spiritual symbol that I use in quite a bit of my art. It's not that familiar with us. It's really a symbol that's quite well known and used in Eastern religions. But I think it really is a very strong symbol of spirituality that I try to convey through my art. And here now is the woman. She's fully aroused, awake, and aware of the goddess standing before her and honoring her. And you can see the power of the goddess here with the rays that are radiating from her presence, and also the light that's shining around her. And this is the way Paleolithic women experience the goddess, and how we're asked to experience the goddess as well. And here is another. Now we can identify this woman even more because she's in a nature surrounded by trees, identified with the earth, and raising her arm in joy and celebration. And the drum actually is very important. It's one of the first instruments that women use very often in their religious ceremonies. Mm-hmm. And here is the final expression of Paleolithic spirituality, which causes the whole sky and the whole universe to light up. Mm-hmm. And it's all because she has accepted spirituality of the goddess fully within her being. And this is how my website opens up with this.
Yes, I was going to say, this is the landing page for your website, www.isisrising.net. So, and there is the goddess herself welcoming you into the website.
Right.
So with that being said, would you like to elaborate on any one specific point that you've brought up tonight? Anything that you would like to make sure that our visitors tonight are impressed upon, something that you really want them to stick with them to think over?
Well, one of the things that I want to underline is the idea of conception, the fact that, like we said, conception was not understood for thousands and thousands of years. Mm-hmm. And now it's hard for us to understand how something like that could play in a person's life, you know? And in other words, they were experiencing sex just mainly as pleasure and nothing else.
Yeah, you know,
and there was nothing wrong with it.
No, there was nothing wrong with it. For them, the two of them were independent of each other.
Yeah.
You know, a baby was something that just kind of happened. Yeah. By the grace of the goddess, yes. And sex was fun. Yeah. So they never really thought to marry the two ideas together until years later.
Yes, and also the symbol. This was considered because women had this ability. They were also regarded. And they regarded themselves as being powerful, not like they were more powerful, but that they were powerful, that they had that kind of power, and they were able to identify with it. And it's something that women have been, they've been prevented from ever experiencing that kind of power. And that's one thing that I tried to bring out through my art. You know, you could tell a person these things, but to see it visually has a much stronger impact than just hearing about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Unfortunately, though, we've come to the end of our time tonight. Kim, it has been a distinct pleasure having you back on the show with me tonight. For everyone watching at home, to read more about this, please visit Kim's website, www.isisrising.net. Again, that's www.isisrising.net. Kim, thank you again for just enlightening us today. I mean, I know I knew some of this. I can guarantee you most of my viewers at home did not. It's certainly given all of us a lot to think about.
Yes, I hope so.
So once again, from All Business Media Presents, I'm Chrissy J. Have a good night.